In today's video we're going to be discussing how best to deal with the Dark Angels with our Necron Codex. Hello and welcome back to Planet 40k. If it is your first time here, then hopefully by the end of the video you have subscribed to the channel, as we do put together regular 40k content along with our free polls on YouTube that determine which videos we produce. Now there was a couple of issues with the previous poll. You will have already spotted that this isn't a Know Your Foe video for the Necrons v Orcs. So firstly I had a total mindfuck when creating the poll, totally forgetting that Orcs were just about to get a release. And without that new codex, the video will virtually be redundant instantly, especially with those new Toughness 5 Orc boys. Then secondly, a few people in the comments pointed out that Dark Angels players tend to mix the wings up together in a single list, so doing one wing isn't quite enough. So after factoring those two things in, I've decided to add the two poll percentages together for both the Ravenwing and the Deathwing options, which actually ties the poll with the Orcs, and it also gets me off the hook for the time being. But as soon as the Orcs do come out with the new codex and I've digested it, they'll be the first in line for a Know Your Foe video, so apologies for all of you that were expecting an Orc video today, but I'm sure you will understand. So moving away from that, one last thing to do, which is the shout out of the day, which is going to Andrew Brown for his comment on our first Know Your Foe video, which was against the Death Guard. So shout out to you, Andrew. Okay, so the Dark Angels, a very interesting chapter, as this Marine chapter isn't just a single faction, it's effectively 3 different factions within a single supplement. So firstly you've got the Deathwing, which are infantry based, heavily consistent of Terminator models, and they usually come in that beige creamy paint scheme. Then you've got the Ravenwing, which are predominantly biker models, which come in the black paint scheme. You do also get the Flyers and the Land Speeders in there too. Then finally you've got the Green Wing, which is pretty much everything else, more of a gun line, and they come in the standard Dark Angel dark green colours. So this video is going to be split into 3 sections where not only will be discussing things to look out for, but also ways to counter it with our beloved Necron army. So to begin the video, first we need to discuss the faction abilities for the Dark Angels models as a whole. Firstly they got the chapter tactic of Grim Resolve. This is a +1 to attack hit rolls if the unit remains stationary. Now it doesn't include pile-ins or consolidation moves, so it can be used in combat if you are charged while being stationary, or in the second round of combat too, because you won't have moved. So hitting on 2s with almost everything is pretty nuts. They also auto pass combat attrition tests, so at the most only one model will flee when failing morale. We also know that Space Marines have the Angels of Death ability for the combat doctrines, the Shock Assault, the Bolter Discipline, and the And Thou Shalt Know No Fear, although that won't have any effect because they auto pass the combat attrition anyway. That's the universal faction abilities. The supplement also has 3 separate super doctrines, 1 for each wing. So now we're going to splinter off into the 3 separate wings, starting with the Deathwing. So the Deathwing super doctrine is implacable, so while the assault doctrine is active for the army, each time a Deathwing infantry or a Deathwing dreadnought model from your army makes a melee attack against a character unit, or a unit that contains a model with a wounds characteristic with 8 wounds or more, then you can re-roll the wound rolls. Half the battle will be played in the assault doctrine, and the early battle rounds you're not actually going to be in combat, especially turn 1 when they're probably not even on the board anyway, they'll be deep striking. Now all models in the Deathwing also gain the Inner Circle ability, which is quite unreal to say the least. So firstly they auto pass morale, very nice. They can't fall out of combat unless they're the Chapter Master, but a big part of their ability is you cannot wound them on less than a 4+. That applies to infantry. Now they virtually have a permanent transhuman physiology on them at all times. As for a detachment ability, if they're taken in a Vanguard detachment, then almost every Terminator model will gain the Objective Secured ability with the First Company ability. Okay, so that's the key faction rules from the Deathwing out of the way. So far we know that this detachment is going to consist of infantry models that are extremely hard to remove and are likely to be Terminators, which of course have the Deep Strike ability. So Terminators are not only tanky, but they're very good in melee, and they've also got access to some pretty decent firepower to go with that. Then add the fact that they've got a 5+ invulnerable save, which can be increased to a 4+ if they opt for some storm shields. They can further be tanked up with characters, just to name a few here, the obvious one being the Deathwing Terminator Apothecary. He can also deep strike in with those Terminators, but has all that apothecary goodness to heal the wounds and bring models back each turn. But he's also got his own invuln save, and he's going to have a 2+ armor save, so picking him off won't be easy. Plus he can be made into a chief apothecary too, so the stratagem becomes free to use, and he's also going to be healing a flat 3. So usually you'd pull out your death marks to snipe off an apothecary with that -2 AP or -3 AP with the Mefrit Dynasty at half range, but this may take a little longer than planned, especially when the Deathwing are not on the board in turn 1, and if you went first you won't be firing at them in turn 2 either. Also, to make matters worse, there's units such as the Deathwing Command Squad, which have the bodyguard ability similar to our Lich Guard, so you can't even target the characters anyway. They've got the Deathwing Ancient, which is another one. He's also one to watch because he can take a relic, gives a core unit the ability to -1 to any damage taken, a bit like Death Guard. So this is almost going to make a lot of your damage 2 weapons and your damage D3 weapons redundant. So the Deathwing is stuff nightmares are made of, and this isn't even the strongest wing. They do also have characters such as Azrael that grants all biker and infantry units within 6 a 4+ invulnerable save against ranged attacks. And they've got Belial, who's the Grandmaster of the Deathwing, who's effectively a chapter master here. He grants all the rerolls to the hit rolls, and he wounds on 2 with this Sword of Silence to anything that isn't a vehicle. And of course the more generic options such as a Terminator Captain who's going to gain the Deathwing keyword. So what on earth do we do to combat all of this? Pray maybe? Well, get into a melee fight is probably a big no-no. These guys hit hard and have the endurance to stay in a fight all game round. And they've got the objective secured, so they're not going to mind hanging around and grinding you down. I think more elite units in this case are not ideal. Even our best melee units such as the Scorpec Destroyers, even while using the Novak Dynasty, just isn't going to power up against the Deathwing. Also, I don't believe using expensively high strength weapons and high damage weapons would work either, as Terminators can pretty much select who they want to charge on the deep strike, and they can reduce the effectiveness of them in battle. So instantly this removes units such as the Locust Destroyers and anything with the blast ability, so no Doomstalkers and no Doomsday Arcs. The best approach is mass arms fire at strength 4, and I mean mass. Lots and lots of warriors. I'd go mainly with the Gorse Flayers. As you can expect the Terminators to come close and get within rapid fire range, then the Methodic code will help somewhat to get that range up, and the AP too. The Saltec code could also add to the rapid fire range, or you could go custom with the Dynasty and select Healthy Paranoia, maybe pair this with Immovable Phalanx or Pitiless Hunters. You could also take Unyielding for lots of 6+ invulnerable saves if you wanted to as well. Gorse Reapers on the Warriors is also an option, because they're going to wound on 3s, but it doesn't work with all the rapid fire dynasties. Of course, if you are taking warriors, then you also need to be taking anything that buffs those warriors, so you've got Overlords for the My Will Be Done ability and the Resurrection Orbs, Ghost Arcs, Technomancers and even a Canoptic Reanimator. The longer you keep your warriors alive, the better. Warriors aren't just providing you with 40 Gorse Reaper shots per unit, they've also got objectives secured, which will easily outnumber a Terminator unit for objectives. And if they do get caught in melee, get the Royal Wardens ready. That will get them out of combat and still be firing, so taking a combination of everything just mentioned is a must. But this isn't enough, these units need protecting. Like with most factions, you need to screen guys. You basically need Canoptic Scarabs and a lot of them. Keep them quite far ahead of the warriors, but not to the point where you can't physically target the Terminators with your rapid fire range, which makes your dynasty selection even more important here. Also, do not charge the Terminators with the Scarabs, let them waste their charging on you. If you charge them, you're likely going to lose your screen in your own turn, allowing the Deathwing Terminators to then move 5 inches in their own movement phase and then make a charge on your warriors and other key units. If you want a unit that's got a little bit more of a bite to it, then you could go with the Lich Guard or the Canoptic Wraiths, as both have access to an invuln save, which will really slow that Deathwing down. Wraiths can also be good to go adventuring to collect and hold some other objectives. Tomb Blades also fulfill that role, and they can provide some firepower back towards your defense to help your warriors. Something else to look for is a stratagem that the Deathwing use. They've got the Deathwing Assault stratagem, which is a +1 to wound at range when they teleport in. Also, no foe too great to subdue, which is specifically designed for Deathwing Knights, which gives them a +1 to wound and a +1 to the AP. Now be very aware that your opponent is likely to field Deathwing Knights, and the Knight Sergeant is known as the Huntmaster, has a weapon that can spill damage to other models in the unit, and every other model in that Deathwing Knights unit is going to have a mace, which is effectively a Thunderhammer without the -1 to hit. And these guys can carry Storm Shields too. So back to our defense. Death Marks I do like a lot of the time, but Deathwing players use Death Stars that consists of a lot of different characters, and some of them having the bodyguard in command squad, so they may actually be redundant. If that's the case, they most likely will be. So that just really leaves the bigger stuff. The Catan Shards, these are always a very viable option, as they can only lose 3 wounds per phase, so you can have one of them in the front line. A Nightbringer is going to be slicing through invulnerable saves and any feel no pain saves from an apothecary. It still requires a 4+ to wound though, however the Catan powers causing mortal wounds will bypass this completely, so you could opt to run multiple detachments with cheaper Catans such as the Transcendent Catan Shard, and then run a few of them. Also pay the command point to use the extra powers each turn, as the mortal wound damage could be crucial. I'd also like to add the Monolith in here, which is now cheaper to field in terms of CP with the new chapter approved. And these things not only provide the wall in front of your warriors, but they also provide a good amount of melee, which will eat those Terminators for breakfast. The slight issue is the wall is also now blocking your own guys from targeting the Terminators, but it's still something to think about. The most important thing to be doing though is to ensure that you're still scoring victory points. Focus on the key area of the board and try to move your castled army towards it to prevent your opponent from scoring in that area. If this isn't achievable, then you could have 2 different castles, one for your backline and one to progress to the centre of the table. Then rely on your fast attack options to go hunting for other objectives. If you are playing against a pure Deathwing army, then you'll find that once they deep strike in, they're quite slow with that 5-inch movement. Unfortunately for us, Dark Angels players like to take the best of both worlds and take multiple wings within a single list, which takes us on to the second wing available to the Dark Angels players, which is the Ravenwing. To start us off here, they've got their Super Doctrine, which is Speed of the Raven. So while in the Devastator Doctrine, which is turn 1, they get an additional 3 inches to their movement, and they're also eligible to shoot in the turn in which they advanced, as if it was an assault weapon, so a -1 to shoot, but they can advance. So a lot of their bikes are going to be moving at 14 inches, which now becomes 17 inches, and they can advance on top of that with a turbo boost, which is actually a straight 6 inches, which makes 23 inches, and they're still firing. All Ravenwing models also gain the Jink ability, so if they move they're going to get a 5+ invulnerable save against ranged attacks, and if they advance it goes up to a 4+, but if they don't move at all, and they remain stationary, they will lose the Jink save. As for another detachment ability, if they're taking in an Outrider detachment, then the Bite squads and the Outrider squads will gain objectives secured with the second company ability. So we know that the Ravenwing generally consists of fast biker units, all with that Jink ability, so they've got a fair few wounds and the toughness 5, so they're going to be a pain to shift. So let's take a look at some of the options to begin with. So as mentioned, mainly bikes here, and there are some flyers with the Ravenwing area of the supplement, but flyers right now aren't a huge deal. They've also got land speeders, which aren't that great. So the bike options within the supplement are pretty good. Firstly, the Ravenwing Black Knights. Not only are they carrying 2-shot plasmas each, which are plasma talons, but they can also hit quite hard in combat with their Strength 5 Corvus hammers, and they're 2 damage a pop. Then like most bikes, they can move 14 inches with the Jink save. Now the only thing that comes mildly close within the Necron Codex are the Tomb Blades, but they're not anywhere near up to par in comparison. They've only got 2 wounds, they've got no melee, they're tricky to buff using core as there's only really command barges that keep up, and of course they're not carrying 2-shot plasmas. Now the Black Knights are also a core unit, so they're very easily buffed with characters which can keep up, which we will be checking out in a moment. So I wanted to just touch upon a stratagem that is commonly used with the Black Knights, which is weapons from the Dark Age. It's 2 command points, and you're using it on plasma weapons which are adding +1 to the damage. Now if you are supercharging these weapons, it's already going to be damage 2, so with this stratagem it's becoming damage 3. It's also worth mentioning that Dark Angels players don't just stick to their supplement here, as they've got the Space Marine Codex at their disposal, and there's plenty of bite units which now gain the Ravenwing keyword, and then basically gain Jink as well, and the Grim Resolve chapter tactics to hit on 2s if they don't move. Thankfully though, if they don't move, they will lose their Jink save, so it's kind of one or the other. So we're talking about Outriders here, which are very tanky, or Invader ATV squads with 8 wounds per bike, carrying multi-melters or Onslaught Gatling cannons, and the generic bite squads and attack bite units too. So let's take a look at these characters before we work out how our Necrons are going to compete with the Ravenwing force. Samael, being the Grandmaster of the Ravenwing, is pretty much a mini chapter master, as he grants all the rerolls to the hit rolls, instantly makes those plasma weapons on the Black Knights much more deadlier, as they're going to be less afraid of those self-harming supercharges. Alternatively, a Bite Captain with the Rights of Battle Aura to reroll the ones will do them just fine. And just like with the Deathwing, the Ravenwing also got their own apothecary, and he's going to be on the bike, so again those death marks could be something to consider from firing in turn 1. However, the apothecary is going to also have that Jink save. Then they've got a Telemaster, which I recently dubbed as one of the best HQs in the game. It's a lieutenant on a land speeder with a lot of DACA. It's got 12 assault cannon shots and 6 heavy bolter shots. Then add a power sword. Yep, you heard that right, a land speeder that can fight, and he can also take relics too. The word of warning here, the model is likely to be holding a certain relic that allows it to hit on 2s even in Overwatch. And also the targets that it's firing at will never gain a cover save. So just don't charge this thing is all I'd say. Ravenwing have also got the Bite Ancient and the Bite Champion. Now usually Ancients don't offer much in terms of damage, but even the Ravenwing version has a 2-shot Plasma Talon. And both of those of course gain Jink. You do also have a chaplain on the bike for the litanies that will keep up with all the models as well. And finally, I wanted to mention the Dark Shroud. He's got some DACA, same as the Telemaster with its ranged weapons, but in particular he's got a rule that's really useful, which is called the Icon of the Old Caliban. It's an aura for Dark Angels units within 6 inches of the model. Each time a ranged attack is made against the unit, you're subtracting 1 from the attack's hit roll. So it's a -1 to hit anything that is within 6 inches of this land speeder. So it's pretty powerful, especially as you're not going to be catching the bikes in combat due to their speed, so you're going to be forced to use ranged attacks. Now bikers of course don't deep strike, so they will be deployed as normal, but where the Deathwing like to get in your face, Ravenwing like to keep at arm's length to shoot you to death, all while collecting victory points from the objectives. So I wanted to also make you aware of a few common stratagems that you're going to see within the Ravenwing. So the first one is the hunt. This is a pre-game movement. Similar to our Relentlessly Expansionist, it only works on one Ravenwing unit. They can make a normal move as if it was their movement phase, but can't be getting anywhere within 9 inches of our models. But as these guys have got a 14-inch move, that's making up a ton of ground. Then they've got Swift Strike, which is done in the fight phase. After a Ravenwing unit has fought, they can effectively fall back as if it was the movement phase, and then move away for only 2 command points before we've even hit them back. So they're basically hitting us and running off. So how are we going to deal with this problem? Most will fail unfortunately, as Dark Angels are one of the top tier factions at present. Now firstly I'd say play the objectives. The first weakness of the Dark Angels Ravenwing models is objectives. They like to stay at range and at the same time they want to be holding objectives. So if you can go for those same objectives that the Ravenwing models are trying to hold, that also means you're going to be in a fight with them. They can't do both. Which kind of brings me on to their second weakness, which is melee. That's their second weak spot. They're not going to simply allow our melee units to get in any type of range for a combat to happen, unless you're using some semi-risky play with a deep strike charge, with our Ophidian Destroyers, or a Veil of Darkness charge with our Lich Guard. Or the Nephrit Dynasty could hold some value too with the Translocation Crypt stratagem to get other units such as Wraiths to deep strike. Now Dark Angels won't have screens in the same way that we do with our Scarabs, as everything is quite pricey with Space Marines, and rightly so, as they're obviously very strong, so a deep strike charge is viable. Maybe if you've got several Ophidian Destroyer units and a Lich Guard unit with an Overlord and a Veil of Darkness to spring off in turn 2, you'd hope half the charges at least were made. Still a risky play of course, but using the Novak code or Butchers from the custom dynasties will assist with that +1 to the charge roll. The next issue with this is bikers can fall back, and they can fall back pretty fast. So Lich Guard in particular will not catch them once they have deep struck in. They'll need to do all the work in the first round of combat. Don't bother using the Disruption Field stratagem, as it only brings the War Scythes to strength 8 and the Hyperface Swords to strength 7. So you're still going to be wounded on 3s due to the toughness of the bikes being toughness 5. Scarabs again are worth every penny here. They aren't quite as quick as a bike, but they still move 10 inches and maybe you can catch a unit and tie it up. And if you wanted to go shooty, then you've got the options of the Saltec code, the Mefrit code, or the custom codes, all benefit a shooty Necron list. So looking briefly at the HQs, a command barge is something that can catch those Dark Angel bikes up, and has got both the range attacks and the melee, so it could be a decent shout. Any Overlord type is vital, as every shot counts, so if you can get your warriors hitting on 2s with the My Will Be Done ability, it's going to massively help. Troop wise, I'd use both types. Immortals outrange the Bolters and the Plasma Talon Bikers, as Immortals have got 30-inch Gauze Blasters, which can go up to 33 inches with the Mefrit code, or using Healthy Paranoia. Okay, the bikes can simply move closer and fire, but now you've unlocked the door for other units to target the bikes, so shorter range units such as Warriors, or maybe a melee unit that can now pop out of terrain and make a move and then charge in your own turn. Now I would still go with Warriors as well, just for the resiliency, especially when you're pairing it with things like the Ghost Arcs, the Technomanters, the Resurrection Orbs and whatnot. They also have access to that Veil of Darkness relic, and you can be using that with your Gorse Reapers. 20 Warriors, that's going to remove almost 4 bikers in a single shooting phase, and that includes the 5+ Jinx save. This makes another unit a solid option, which is the Night Scythe. It can be used hand in hand with the Veil of Darkness because they can be selecting their targets with ease, popping out of the Night Scythe, doing their thing, then using the Veil of Darkness to go for another target. And the Flyer is also obviously going to work with the Lich Guard too. The only issue with the Flyer is you're not buffing the core units with the My Will Be Done ability in the command phase because you're in the Flyer. You could also opt to make the charge with the Warriors after shooting, just to try and tag a unit up and forcing them to fall back. And then we've got Death Marks. We already mentioned these, but those in-1 saves will probably put you off taking them because they're not going to make 180 points back from a full unit. If you want to add some more support to your firepower, then take a Triarch Stalker for that targeting relay. And he's also got his own firepower, and you can opt for the 30-inch twin heavy Gorse Cannon to keep him out of range of being targeted. Tomb Blades we've also already mentioned, can keep up with the bikes, but there's no reason as they can't fight in melee. So really they're less useful against Ravenwing, as you need to be a fast melee unit to be taking objectives. Wraiths are much better for this. The big stuff is actually okay as an option for once. The bikes aren't likely to ride into your own deployment and get into melee with you, as it's suicide versus a slower army, so a Doomsday Ark and a Doomstalker do have a part to play when picking off bikers each turn. Even more so with the new cheaper Locust Destroyers. The heavy ones in particular with the Gorse Destructors are going to be wounded on 2s, and each wound that goes through is going to remove a bite unit each turn. And those Blacklights in particular are 45 points with the Corvus Hammer upgrade. As for the even bigger stuff, Catan Shards are always amazing. I've been more tempted with the Void Dragon on this occasion, as it's got a 12-inch range attacks, so if you can't quite get into melee at least it can ping off a strength 9 shot, but the Catan powers are really what it's all about for the mortal wounds. Similarly, Plasmanters have a role here, throwing out lots of mortal wounds with their 2 abilities. Then of course the Silent King, he's popping off shots left and right. He's got 9 strength 6 shots, he's got 3 strength 8 shots with 2 damage, then he's got a couple of strength 12 shots for good measure with the Meniers. Each one of those is damage 6 too, and he's also buffing Praetorians, which we've not really mentioned here, but they're very quick at 10 inches, and they're going to be a good assault unit to hunt down anything holding an objective, as they're pretty good in range and pretty good at melee with the Rod of Covenants. So that's almost everything I can think of regarding the Ravenwing. Finally, we've got the Green Wing. Now the Green Wing is a bit more of what you would imagine from a standard Space Marine army, troops on foot, lots of intercessors and whatnot. Now they're going to be making the most out of the chapter tactics because they're likely going to be remaining stationary, so they're going to be hitting on 2s a lot with the Grim Resolve ability. So they've got their own super doctrine, which is Fire Discipline. So while in the tactical doctrine, infantry models can fire rapid fire and assault weapons into engagement range, however it'll be on a 5+ to hit. So it's a really rare ability for normal weapons that fire into combat without being an actual vehicle or a monster. So this kind of list is likely going to be having units that stay back, so heavy intercessors for 1, to give them a bit of range and a bit of tankiness on their own objectives. Azrael is a common HQ character used within the Green Wing. Even though he's got the Deathwing keyword, he's not a Terminator, so he doesn't deep strike in with the Terminators, but he's going to grant core units around him a 4+ invulnerable save against ranged attacks. And of course he's got that Chapter Master ability to allow those core units to re-roll everything. Now the Dark Angel's got a Psychic called Ezekiel. He could see some play here because all the Dark Angel's powers are kind of gross, so just be aware of them and make sure you read your opponent's powers carefully because they're all really good. The last thing you want to do is get into combat with him and find out that your auras have all been turned off. Asmodai, or the Interrogator Chaplain, will also have their litanies, so be aware of that. Now Asmodai in particular gets a +1 to his litanies, and the Litany of Hate gains an additional 3 inches. But for the rest of the force, you're likely to see a Gunline army, a Redemptor Dreadnought perhaps hitting on 2s, or possibly Devastators as well. Then you may see some Aggressors or Hellblasters on top of that. So slower models that want to shoot. This is probably the weakest wing, but by no means is this an easy fight. They're all still power armor marines after all. Now the elephant in the room is the fact that Dark Angels players will frequently take more than 1 detachment and mix the wings up. This is by far the biggest of our problems. Even the separate wings alone are a struggle for us, but when you're taking a Deathwing faction with the first company ability for all those Terminators having objectives secured, and then combine it with the Ravenwing second company detachment, this time giving all those Bikes objectives secured, you're just in a world of pain. Because your primary focus is going to of course be those deep striking Terminators from turn 2, but in the meantime those Ravenwing Bikers are providing additional support from range, all while scoring uncontested objective points, and the Terminators may even be stealing points from you as well. Even if you survive the Terminator onslaught, you're going to have taken a lot of casualties, and the Ravenwing side of things is still going to be in full force. This is currently where our Necron Codex hits a glass ceiling. We simply do not have access to these kind of options, and the options we do have are underperforming. This is kind of why I wanted to go originally with the wings separately with different videos, because combating all of them at the same time is very difficult. To add to this, something I've just spotted in the Dark Angel supplement, which I'm finding quite funny, they've got a stratagem called Secret Agenda. I just thought I'd show you this for giggles. The stratagem is done after selecting your secondary objectives. You do not reveal one of your objectives to your opponent. The first time you score your victory point for it, then you reveal it. So effectively you're hiding one of your secondary objectives until you actually get it. Yeah. So hopefully I've outlined our best way of combating each wing. Now combining the advice with the multi-wings is the real challenge. Guys, I hope you're enjoying the series, and again apologies for the lack of orcs here. But as soon as their book is out, we're going to be diving into that, and we're going to be splatting some green skins with our Necron might. As for the next Know Your Foe, there'll be a poll showing up at some point, so keep your eyes open for that and get voted on those polls. So yeah, like the video when your exits. Thank you all for watching, and subscribe if you are new, and I'll see you in the next one.